Let me ask each of you to give an estimate of how endangered you think the people of Israel are right now in this Iranian situation, bearing in mind that with Jews, it's always a state of danger, sometimes more, sometimes less. In historical perspective and compared to other places in the globe, how grim is today's situation and how hot should the alert be?
I think the situation is more dangerous and worse than it's ever been since 1973, certainly. I think I see a perfect storm brewing. The perfect storm is the fact that Israel today cannot defend itself against aggression without being accused of war crimes. One of the worst abominations is Richard Goldstone and the Goldstone Report. A pompous windbag, a lazy person, a person who accepted this for one reason only, to give it a hechsher, a certification of kashrut. He allowed himself to be used as a Jew and didn't do the hard work necessary to see through the report that was prepared primarily by anti-Israel zealots. Think of what that does to the peace movement in Israel. The peace movement in Israel used to be able to say, we'll abandon the settlements, we'll leave the Gaza, we'll leave the West Bank, and don't worry, if there are rockets, we'll be able to go in and attack those who send the rockets. After all, President Obama, when he was a candidate, said we could do that, and others have said we could do it. The law of international relations, the law of war permits us to do it. And so Israel waits 6 years, 8,000 rockets, traumatizing 1 million Israelis, and it goes in, tries harder than any country in history to reduce civilian casualties, has some civilian casualties because Hamas uses what they call the CNN strategy, what I call the dead baby strategy. They put their children in harm's way so that they will be killed and shown on TV. And Richard Goldstone falls for it hook, line, and sinker. And now it's going to be much harder for Benjamin Netanyahu and others to say to the Israeli people, we'll leave the West Bank and we'll be able to defend you. No, you won't be able to defend the people of Israel without committing war crimes. And the Palestinian hypocrisy. Abbas was on the phone virtually every hour, pushing the Israelis. More, end the Hamas control. You're not doing enough. Don't leave. And now they were the first people to call for an investigation. Then they backed away under American pressure. And they said, no, maybe we should postpone. And today, of course, they went back and said, no, we must have an investigation. So combine that with Iran, and let's assume that Iran poses only a 5% threat, but a 5% threat of nuclear holocaust when you have the liberal in Iran, Rafsanjani, saying, if we develop a bomb and drop it on Tel Aviv, we'll kill 3 to 5 million Jews. They will retaliate by dropping a bomb on Tehran, killing 15 to 20 million Muslims, and the trade-off will be worth it. This is the liberal, and we are going to trust Iran with a nuclear weapon? I think this is a disastrous situation, and both the Republicans and the Democrats, both the Bush administration, when Gates and Connie Rice were in charge, and this administration have basically said to Israel, I believe you do not have our permission to defend yourselves in relation to Iran. Brzezinski, of course, has said, well, if you try to defend yourself against Iran, American jets should shoot down Israeli jets. This poses a very grave dilemma for Israel. When you combine that with the way the Security Council and the Human Rights Council conspire against Israel, Israel has very few friends left in the world, which is why it is so crucially important for Jews to maintain their credibility with our most important friend in the world, the United States of America and its current president.
Dennis, your estimate?
Okay. This is very interesting. Twice now, Alan has said how important it is for Jews not to, first he said abandon, and now whatever the other term was, to not give up on or not alienate the President of the United States. The implication, it seems to me, is very clear that if Jews do, it might alienate this president from Jewish concerns. I should just like to remind Alan and everyone here that Jews did abandon George W. Bush, and he stayed rock solid on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people.
But not his father.
But not,
Not
I'm
his
talking
father.
about George W. Bush. His father was not a conservative. To this day, I do not know what George Bush Sr. believes in other than jumping from airplanes. It was a puzzle to me how before he ever ran for president, I wrote an article on him in which I said, I know of no American who had served more positions of distinction without
mediocrity.
distinction
I completely
than George
agree.
Bush
I
Sr.
wrote the same thing.
He's a phenomenon. He is worthy of a study, how you can get that far doing so little. But the son actually believed in what you may not agree, many of you, and Alan certainly, I suspect, wouldn't agree on many things with him. But George W. Bush had conviction, and one conviction was no matter how much the Jews dumped on him, and Jews did, there was never the slightest fear that he would abandon Israel or Jewish concerns because he had principles.
I agree with that.
Okay,
I agree with that.
and
I
I know
admire
that.
him for
Okay,
it. And
that's
I
very
have
important.
told him so.
That's why I have much more faith in conservatives than in liberals. You are a wonderful, terrific, and you know I'm not patronizing you, exception. And the more that there are of you, the better it is for the Jewish people in Israel. Kain Yirbu, may the Dershowitzes of the world reproduce in many numbers. But you are a phenomenon. The very fact that you said when you show up at Yale and speak on behalf of Israel, you have to first convince them you're not a Dennis Prager or a Christian or a conservative. That shows what's happened. That to them it's an oxymoron, liberal pro-Israel.
They're trying to make it that.
Well, they have. It's a fact. They're not living in a deluded world. It's a tragedy. Liberalism here, I didn't get a chance in my first comment, so David, just let me say this. We're talking as Jews, not just as Americans. We're talking specifically as Jewish Americans. Let me just say this. If there's anything that I believe in Judaism, it is the great line from the Psalms, Ohavei Adonai sin ura, those of you who love God must hate evil. Liberalism abandoned the hatred of evil that I find to be the central tenet and the greatness of Judaism. It stopped hating communism, and it stopped hating Islamofascism. You can't even use the term. And this has been, if you don't hate evil, you will not be strong on Israel. That's the way it works.
I agree, but I don't agree that characterizes liberalism. That characterizes radicalism. I hate communism. I fought against communism all my life when I was a student at Brooklyn College. And I think every liberal has an obligation to fight against the extremism that doesn't hate evil. But I think the idea of assimilating all of liberalism into radicalism, as Phillips, the writer in England, basically made me the equivalent of Noam Chomsky. There are liberals, and the people whose names I read to you before, from Ted Kennedy to Bill Clinton and to almost all the United States senators who are Democrats, almost all 60 of them, with maybe one or two exceptions, they're liberals, and they're strong supporters of Israel. And I want to keep it that way. I don't want to allow the radicals to lay claim to the conscience of liberalism. I don't want them to be able to define what a liberal is. Now, they are succeeding at some colleges and universities. They are succeeding at Irvine. They are failing at Harvard. And they are failing at Harvard because Charles Ogletree, who's a great liberal and an African American, is one of the strongest supporters of Israel on the campus. Skip Gates, who's a prominent African American, is one of the strongest supporters of Israel on the campus. Many other liberals support Israel. That is a very important thing to maintain. Now, I acknowledge this may be a generational issue. The people I've described are all over 50, and I very much worry that the next generation of kids in their 20s and 30s, those extremist lines which you complained, and I join you in complaining about in the beginning, where you can't have a nuanced discussion in the Middle East, seems to be dominating on some college campuses. And that's why we have to introduce nuance and complexity to the discussion. And I think we're succeeding. We're succeeding at Yale. We're succeeding at Harvard. We're succeeding at Princeton. We're failing at Irvine. It's a mixed result at Berkeley. We're succeeding at UCLA. We have great victories and a lot of defeats, and the struggle continues.